You are now entering the Three Empires Podcast, by far the most dastardly and majestic political system in all the land. With your hosts, Shahab and Stefano.
And we are recording. All is well in the universe.
And we're done.
Oh, well, that's too bad.
So you may be asking, why are we enjoying our mojitos today? Fine Cuban cigars
All is well.
and statues of historical figures. Well, you simple Scythian scum, that's because we are recording a special episode of the Three Empires Podcast today.
You have the honor of joining Stefano and I in one of our most highly anticipated segments. Well, anticipated for us. I don't know how many people are out there watching us at the moment.
The three sweaty Samoan gentlemen watching us are very excited for this podcast.
Oh, yes.
So, but first, a book recommendation.
Oh, what do you have there, Stefano?
What do I have here? Well, it appears I have Mike Duncan's The Storm Before the Storm. Now, as per usual, you can find all book recommendations on the link in the description. As well, we should get a Goodreads account set up sometime.
Absolutely.
Amazon link as well. So, Storm Before the Storm. If you like Roman history, which you do, but
You absolutely have to if you like this show.
if you don't like Roman history and you're here, what the fuck are you doing? So,
Fair enough.
for me at least, Shab, this book is good, I think, for people who love history. They love a great story, but they don't like the dry, pedantic, academic writing that it often comes with.
You know, that's very much the problem that turns a lot of people off to history. And, you know, that's its own separate issue. But I do remember a time when history was one of my least favorite subjects back in elementary school. When we had to, for those of us who don't know, we live in Canada, so we had to learn a great deal about Canadian history. By the way, an enormously fascinating subject, but taught to elementary school standards, to elementary school students, is abysmal.
Taught incorrectly, if I'm going to be quite honest. Taught completely incorrectly.
Oh, yeah.
So, Storm Before the Storm by Mike Duncan changes that. He was first a podcaster. He made, speaking of epic history podcasts.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, he made a history podcast called The History of Rome. Check it out if you haven't already. Which details the Roman Empire from its beginning to the end. For the fall of the West, from the Kingdom of Rome to the fall of the West. Now, basically, in this book, he talks about a specific story which a lot of people haven't heard. It's the generation right before Julius Caesar.
Okay.
So he gets into the Roman Civil War between Sulla and Gaius Marius.
Wow.
Even before that, he begins with the Marian reforms. There's a lot of great stories in it. And what I love about it is that he's not just a great historian, in my view. He's a great storyteller, right? The man can tell a story. And I think kind of if you've heard his podcast before, the style he brings to the genre of history writing is, you know, it's very colloquial and entertaining without being lowbrow at the same time. And it's
very important.
Yeah, it's a fascinating period in history. A lot of larger-than-life figures. You got Gaius Marius, you know,
Very important figure.
called the third founder of Rome. He completely changed Rome's armies forever. Sulla the Butcher, the man who they feared was going to bring down the Roman Republic and bring dictatorship to Rome, slaughtered an untold amount of people in Rome. And then the next, a couple years later, gives power up and becomes a farmer.
Wow.
Very, very fascinating period in history. So this is our recommendation for the week.
Please do enjoy. Check it out at your local bookstore if you can find it online for purchase, not for download.
We'll put, you download it legally, I'll beat the shit out of you.
I will beat the shit out of you. It'll be a joint beating.
We will fuck
of
you
thine
up,
ass.
prison style. But
Totally kidding.
the link to the book on Amazon can be found. So, little question I wanted to ask you, my dude.
This is the anecdote I've been anticipating as well.
So, not too long ago, this old man, we called him Old Man El Porno. He lives in our neighborhood, right?
El Porno?
Old Man El Forno, and then morphed into Old Man El Porno because he's so perverted.
Gotcha.
So he lives in our neighborhood, He rides around on this old bicycle, this old perverted bicycle in a low gear, just slowly kind of accosting people, right?
Oof.
And he's a fucking pervert.
Sure, yeah.
He's old. He's like in his late 70s or something. But he is a fucking pervert. So the other day, he'll talk to us sometimes. We're a couple of my friends, I wasn't personally there at the time, we're chilling. Who will remain nameless for the sake of privacy of this story.
To protect the innocent.
Yes. So him, his girlfriend, and you know, my cousin are all chilling.
Right.
And this old man sees this girl and assumes that she's with a good friend of ours. She assumes that she's with my cousin, right?
Uh-huh.
So he's like, you with Lucas?
Oh, jeez.
Oh, Lucas has got a strong cock.
Oh my god.
And then...
That's a very convincing voice as well.
Yeah. And
Oh,
then
jeez.
the old man starts trying to grab her and lift up her shirt.
Oh boy. Of course.
Lucas,
Why not, right?
Lucas grabs him. He's like, hey, you can't fucking do that. Get out of here, you weird old pervert.
Yeah.
So, we had a debate, me and Lucas. If this old man did that to your girlfriend, what do you do? He's old. He's on his last leg of life.
Right.
You know what I said? I slap the fucking taste out of his mouth and sleep a full 8 hours. That's what I do. What do you think?
Slap the taste out of him? What
Slap
is
the
that?
taste out of his mouth.
Oh.
And then sleep a full 8 hours that night.
True, yeah, honestly, by that point, see, okay, he's old, sure, but that's not an excuse to be grabbing people being all nasty and perverted. Even if you are on your last legs of life, it's irrelevant. You have to behave like a human being and treat other human beings
Honestly,
as such.
honestly,
Like, come on.
If you're going to be this revered, older, person in society that people look up to, and I'm sorry, you're an adult,
Yeah. Like, you should have the wisdom and experience by that point in your life to know that there are boundaries, not just in society, but like general human interaction, you sick fuck. But,
So-
whatever.
Do you punch him?
Punch him? No. I'd probably give him a strong shove, because I mean, I don't want to punch him because then I don't want to go to jail, so probably a strong shove. And
Would you
perhaps
know,
like
he's
grip his,
sexually molesting your girlfriend?
if I gripped his arm tight enough and gave him like a quick thrust with my palm, that should be enough, but
Yeah, look at the fucking size of these hands.
Yeah, 'cause I mean, yeah,
this guy would probably tear his arm off.
that'd probably be enough, but yeah.
Honestly, even if he's in a wheelchair, I'm Spartan kicking him to the floor.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But
I don't know about that, but I don't think I want to kill the man. But yeah, I definitely want to get my message across that don't fuck around. Come on, like how old is this guy? Like approximately?
I'm gonna say between 75 and 85.
Jesus.
But he's a big man. Like he's like 6'2", thick, big boned, looks to be in decent health. He's not like a frail old man. You know what I mean? He's a big old guy.
Well, I'd imagine that's what gives him the confidence to do that type of shit. So I mean, yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah, man. So, with all that said, the real reason we're here is a tournament of motherfucking champions.
This is something that we have been researching for weeks now, if not months, and it's
we'll-
something that we have
yeah.
been wanting to do since the beginning. Not just the beginning of this podcast, but the beginning of our academic careers. We have wanted to pit 2, 3, 8 combatants. And by combatants, we mean historical generals, historical monarchs, people who have led other men and women to battle, and pit them against each other.
Yeah.
And of course, these are people who, generally speaking, don't have any historical continuity between themselves. These are people who
Would have never faced.
met in the field of battle.
Yeah, you're on the schoolyard, you're discussing, who would win, Spider-Man or Batman.
There you go.
I was a
exactly.
fucking nerd. I was discussing who would win, Alexander the Great or, Scipio Africanus, maybe. So this is something we've talked about this endlessly. Like, who doesn't think about what history nerd doesn't think about pitting historical figures against each other?
Oh, I definitely did. I remember back when I was in high school, I revered my boy here in front of us, Cyrus the Great. Kudos for you Persians out there. He was my idol. So, when it came to combatants in history against Cyrus always wins. And I always had really strong points to back it up. And of course, the more I learned and I put other combatants against one another, for example, Moctezuma II, the one who essentially led, the first rather, the stronger Moctezuma, not the second. And yeah, that's basically where it began for me in my head. And
Yeah.
now here we are, full-grown adults, doing this shit and trying to make a living out of it.
Now, I'm going to go over some of the parameters, some of the ground rules we're talking about doing here.
Go for it.
So it's an 8-man tournament. It's double elimination.
Yes, sir.
Okay? We're going to go through the 8 combatants in a second. Just going to talk about the format of the tournament. Each matchup, we're going to discuss a historical battle between these two. Now, we have fucking nerd-proofed this shit. We're going to go through their armies, their tactics,
their
general
traits.
information, traits about them,
Yep.
traits, what makes them a good commander, what are going to be their weaknesses.
And indeed, a trait isn't necessarily something that's entirely positive. So a trait could also be something that's detrimental to their overall prowess in combat and their leadership abilities.
Or neutral.
Or neutral, yeah.
Or
it could
neutral.
just be a thing that they have.
Gives
yeah.
them their unique flavor. So
Exactly.
we're going to discuss these leaders' traits, tactics, their armies. Each army of these leaders is going to be taken on from their best battle, right?
Yep.
The pinnacle of their career, the one battle that defines them.
Yep.
We're going to take that army and put it up against each other. It's only fair, I think.
I think so too.
So, after we nerd-proof and discuss, that's good, it's good. After we nerd-proof and we discuss possible factors that would go into the battle, we're going to discuss, one of us is going to go through a scenario of what would happen in the battle. So tell a little story, if you will.
Yeah, that'll be...
It's not fucking Deadliest Warrior. We don't have a bunch of gel torsos
Yeah,
and
none of that.
Dr. Armandorian and pigs and, a bunch of,
As you can probably tell, we have a lot of beef with that show. But that's a segment for a different day.
Yeah, we're doing it on our own.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, by the way, double elimination, right? So, if a figure loses, right?
Yep.
They've got to go up against in a loser's bracket against another figure.
So-
you have to
so
lose
try-
twice to be eliminated.
Try to picture this. You have
We'll put up
our
the bracket.
primary tournament. Yeah, we'll put up the bracket just for visual sake. But we have our primary tournament, our primary bracket. The loser doesn't necessarily get eliminated from the tournament altogether, though. We'll have two separate brackets going on. One for the winners of each individual battle, and one for the losers. Now, the losers will stay within their bracket, and whoever loses in that bracket loses permanently.
If you lose twice, you're out. That's it.
That's exactly
right?
what we're going for.
The-
you
the-
lose twice, you're
In the
gone.
winner's bracket, you're going to see it up on screen. Are going to filter through to the loser's brackets, and then eventually the winner of the loser's bracket, the winner of the winner's bracket, face each other in the end, right? Now, we're going to go through the competitors now.
I like it.
We're going to go through
Shall we number 4 and 4?
4 and 4?
Yeah,
What do you mean?
we'll name off the 4 who are...
Let's just name off all of them, because
Okay.
we're going to discuss them. If you don't know who they are, don't worry, we're going to get into detail on them
Yeah.
later.
No need to worry at all.
Each one of these is a master commander in their own right. Each brings different strengths and weaknesses to the battlefield.
And each of them have, for all intents and purposes, ingrained themselves in the historical mindset and, of course, the historical writings that we as a species have come together with.
Now, without further ado, in our first matchup, we have Saladin,
Saladin al-Ayyubi.
the Kurdish Arabic commander, first ruler of the Ayyubid dynasty, bane of crusaders, the all-around charismatic general and scholar, facing off against
Khosrow Anushirvan, the immortal soul. The first, well, definitely not the first, one of the great, if not one of the greatest, kings in the Sasanian dynasty, leader of countless incursions into Byzantine territory, and definitely the bane of Justinian's entire career. He conquered and devoured a great deal of everything Byzantium held dear. And here he is pitted against his Arabic counterpart, some, what would you say,
man.
1,000 years?
1,000 years later.
About, yeah.
This is the battle of the scholars to me. And next we have William the Conqueror.
The great Norman king who fought and defeated the Saxons at the Battle of Hastings, led by Harold Godwinson. He is the one that broke the line, for all intents and purposes, that broke the line of England's first monarchy under Alfred the Great and established his own as the next continuity of England. His is one of the shield wall formation, which we'll talk about more, and definitely one of the most dangerous combatants we have in this.
And he's facing off against the last Incan emperor, Atahualpa, commander of nations. Peruvian conqueror of much of the South American continent. Able to field a force of hundreds of thousands. The last great independent South American monarch. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Absolutely.
And next in our bracket we have
The mighty and famous Joan of Arc.
bringing in the feminist crowd.
No, not at all. Joan of Arc was a great military commander in and of her own right. She is perhaps if not the most pious combatant we have in this entire tournament. She is the one that single-handedly led and inspired the French troops to retake the city of Orleans and break the siege. And of course, she was present in the recapture of the city of Paris, as well as many other military incursions. She has definitely earned her place in this bracket, especially seeing as how she is by far the latest in historical continuity that we have here. So she will be bringing in gunpowder weapons, but to a very minimal degree, to a very rudimentary degree.
Not the latest Atahualpa, 1400s, late 1400s.
Yes, I stand corrected.
Yeah, it's
You're
all good.
absolutely right. Yep.
And she will be...
Actually, no, they're about contemporaries. Joan of Arc died 1431, so they're both around the 15th century.
Okay.
So the
fair
contemporaries.
enough.
Yeah.
Contemporaries. Facing off, Joan of Arc will be Alexander the Great, one of the most revered historical arsonists of all time.
Definitely.
Conqueror of all of the known world, undefeated in his military career.
No, not really.
Master, yes. Well, we'll get into that later.
We'll get into that.
Master of combined arms, of the phalanx, cavalry commander, a man who believed he was descended from Zeus himself, near immortal in every single battle that he, well, except his battle with alcoholism.
Yes. And
He lost.
whatever other kind of substances they had in ancient Persia and ancient India.
But Alexander the Great, that's an exciting matchup. And
Definitely.
our final matchup is...
Qin Shi Huang. The first, as the name suggests, for those of you who don't know, Qin Shi Huang literally translates to first emperor of the Qin dynasty. This man, born Zhao Zheng, or Yin Zheng, for those of you who are very learned in this man, I don't blame you at all, he's very fascinating, was the one who led the Qin kingdom, the Qin province, into capturing and conquering the other warring states in the Great Unification War. Through blood, through sweat, through tears, he forged a single entity that would be eventually called China in the modern world. He is the first emperor to have seen a vision of a united land, and his memory is very much celebrated today in his works such as the Forbidden Palace, the Great Wall, and of course the Terracotta Army.
And facing off against who some would call the greatest military commander of all time. Not my words, folks. Look it up.
Absolutely.
Scipio Africanus. He defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama. Rome's only hope, bringing them back from the brink of defeat against Carthage in the Second Punic War. Master of cavalry. Master of the legion. Scipio Africanus. Indomitable in his strategy. Able to beat elephants. Able to beat Carthage. Able to, at all odds, defeat one of the greatest military powers of his time. Without the help of the Roman Senate.
I don't know if you viewers are able to tell, but Stefano kind of really, really likes Scipio Africanus. He's kind of into him. I don't know. Can you tell?
I mean, if you see the table rattling, it's because I've got a massive throbbing heart on.
Okay. Thank you.
Good night, folks. So, today, because of the immensity of this task, we're not going to be dealing with every single one of these battles.
Absolutely not. This is a task that would take way more time, way more energy than either of us have. However, we will be covering 2 of the 4 matchups that we have just highlighted for you guys.
Yeah.
You people.
We're going to nerd-proof it. Fuck Dr. Armandorian. Fuck that ginger guy. Fuck the bloody pig carcasses. We're nerd-proofing this shit. Saladin versus Khosrow. William the Conqueror versus Atahualpa.
Those are the 2 matchups we'll be having right now.
But wait, there's more, said the infomercial guy in me. We're also doing battle stages.
Of course.
Because,
I forget.
I mean, these guys aren't fighting in some, random abyss.
No, of course not. We can't see, as much fun as it would be to have our combatants in a completely neutral territory, as we all know, the Earth is simply not neutral ground. There
Yeah.
will be advantages given to some combatants over others, and honestly, these combatants have to be able to adapt as they would have in real life combat.
Mm-hmm. Depending on where the battle takes place, it is going to very, very much decide the outcome of some of these battles.
Definitely.
Because, you see someone like Atahualpa, he's kind of, his technology, his military technology, right, is certainly more primitive than someone like William the Conqueror.
Definitely.
But what if he's fighting William the Conqueror in the jungles of Peru? That is something we need to discuss.
Absolutely.
So
how would William the Conqueror's shield wall formation fare in such an arid climate? How could he possibly have his heavily armed soldiers, even his longbowmen, in such hospitable territory? And how will Atahualpa get around the superior technology that William's bringing up?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for me to at least see who gets what matchup where.
Definitely.
Because Saladin in the desert, if he gets a desert, he's a master of desert warfare.
He is indeed.
But we've got some pretty zany ones.
Sure, yeah.
So I'm going to go through them right now.
All right.
Now, our list. Sahara Desert. Serbian Tundra. Gobi Desert. The Hydaspes. Okay, you know what? I'm going to go into these in a little more detail. So, Sahara Desert. The desert in North Africa. Obviously going to be very familiar.
Which, by the way, Sahara means desert, for those, little tidbit.
Well, ultimate knowledge there. Siberian Tundra. The Gobi Desert in the north of Mongolia. The Hydaspes River and marshland, which is where Alexander fought King Porus, the Indian, his final adversary, the Punjabi king.
Yes.
The Peruvian jungle amidst a clearing, right? A clearing of land, a flat plain,
Right.
surrounded by Peruvian jungle. The Rubicon,
Ooh,
the river that you do not cross if you're a Roman general.
exactly.
Well, as a general, that is. As a
general,
citizen,
you
you
don't.
can cross it.
Yes.
The Tuberg Forest, the site of the massacre of Varus's troops at the hands of Arminius. So basically, for those of you who don't know, dense, thick Germanic forests.
Yeah.
Inhospitable.
Definitely going to be a difficult place to fight.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to form up very easily there. It's just tree after tree after tree. The grassy hills of Scotland.
Okay. Pretty self-explanatory by itself. Lots of hills, highland. You'd be definitely able to have yourself well fortified if you know the terrain, which unfortunately only a few of the combatants here know.
Thracian mountains.
Well, as also suggests, I believe this is Greece, in Thrace, one of the city-states.
Modern day Bulgaria,
Okay.
Greece, and Macedon.
Right. So this is, of course, a mountain range. Very cold, very high altitude, very
rocky,
difficult to breathe in.
Yeah,
So,
rocky, inhospitable. Mm-hmm. And I think Alexander and Scipio are going to be the only two familiar with this terrain, to be honest.
probably, yeah.
A volcano in Hawaii, because, hey, what the fuck?
Yeah, we figured why not. This is a little fun thing we threw in there, because if indeed one of the combatants does have to fight in a volcano in Hawaii, well, how are they going to deal with that?
Yeah. The beaches of South France.
Beaches of South France. Pretty sexy stuff.
A lot of hairy armpitted women there.
Lovely. How will the men possibly fight in such climate?
But my love, how will you fight? I'm tired. Come back to the bitches. Within the city of Jerusalem. Not a siege battle.
Nope.
Fighting in the city itself of Jerusalem.
In the streets itself.
The city of Constantinople.
Yet another.
The Forbidden Palace amidst the terracotta warriors.
Oh my god.
Medieval Paris.
Oh my god.
Just to jerk off Joan a little. And the Grand Canyon.
Because that is by far the most ridiculous one. Because none of these combatants has any idea what lies in the Americas, besides Atahualpa, but only in the very far south. The Grand Canyon is neutral territory, the closest to neutral territory we can get, because nobody knows it.
Yeah. So yeah, this is interesting. The territories, I think, are going to have a huge impact on the battles.
Hell yeah, they will. And one of the great things about this is that this is completely random. So Stefano there's going to press a button, and the random picker is going to pick a random map, and that's where the combatants are going to have to fight. End of story.
Awesome. So, you ready to generate?
Absolutely. So who are we going with first here? Khosrow and Saladin?
I think so.
Alright. Our first matchup is the mighty Khosrow Anushirwan versus Saladin al-Ayyubi.
Where will their armies meet? You ready? Ooh, I'm kind of nervous.
Me too.
What? You've got to be fucking kidding me.
So.
They're fighting in the jungles of Peru amidst a clearing. I was not expecting that. I'd anticipated a lot of things. I was not anticipating them to face here.
Did I say end of story?
Well, all right then.
Peruvian jungle it is. Amidst the clearing.
So, Peruvian jungle.
Oh boy.
Thick, dense terrain.
Yep.
Unfamiliar to both of these.
Completely unfamiliar to both of them. Their armies are very much used to hot, dry climates, deserts, some rivers, mountains at times, hills. Definitely not hot, dense jungles. Not a chance. This is something that both of them are going to have a difficult time adapting to.
Yeah, I think it plays to both of their weaknesses.
Definitely.
Not just because of the climate, but also because of the type of armies they have. Both a lot of cavalry,
Heavy armored cavalry on Khosrow's side.
light cavalry for Saladin. That is not
Shall we go a little more into the tactics and the bios of each combatant?
absolutely.
All right.
Cool. We're gonna give you guys a little bio of each combatant.
Would you like to start?
What's that?
Would you like to start?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
Yeah, we're going to go for a little bio of each combatant, just give you a little background, a little history, so the matchup makes sense for those of you who aren't familiar with them. So, Saladin, you may or may not know this, but I thought he was Arabic. He is probably the most famous Kurd in history. Kurdish commander, a scholar actually. This man grew up as a boy, kind of a sickly nerd, almost. And he wanted to be a scholar. He never wanted to be a military commander. But he was thrust into the role of military commander, and he exceeded, right? He battled crusaders. He battled other Muslims in the form of the Zengids.
True. That's true.
And he fought a two-front war and was able to, with political savvy and ambition, carve out a kingdom. Carve out a dynasty in Egypt, the Ayyubid dynasty, named after him, which would, span hundreds and hundreds of years onward. So, liquid courage. Now, he's a very interesting figure. Very calculating. For traits, I have brave, right? He would often lead actions himself. Charges into battle, which at this period was not unheard of.
Right.
But it's very, very, very risky. He was very much a frontline commander. Strategic, that's another trait of his.
Right.
He was a thinking man. If he could refuse battle, he would, right? Either because he understood the costs of battle, or because he had to do that because he was fighting a two-front war at all times against the Crusaders and against the Muslim adversaries to the north.
A very useful thing, seeing as how he's able to put aside his pride for the sake of the grand scheme, the grander vision.
This could be a strength or a weakness, but if he could bribe an opponent, even in situations that were advantageous to him, if he could bribe you with a massive sum of money to avoid battle and reach a favorable outcome for both of you, he'd do that. Which gets into my next trait, cautious. He's an extremely, extremely cautious man. There was once where he refused to ambush and attack a much smaller Crusader party simply because he noted that they had some very prominent generals in there.
Really?
Yeah, very cautious man. And his style of warfare, as you're going to see later, kind of very much plays into that cautiousness. Yeah.
All right.
So, also, he's a master desert logistician. Not going to matter a fucking ounce in here.
No, unfortunately not.
But for his style of warfare, the nature of warfare in the deserts around Egypt and Syria and the Holy Land, if you control the castles and access to water. Also, he's a master desert logistician. Not going to matter a fucking ounce in here.
No, unfortunately not.
But for his style of warfare, the nature of warfare in the deserts around Egypt and Syria and the Holy Land, if you control the castles and access to water, you are going to win. So that's what Saladin was a master at. Being very cautious, framing the battle in a way in which he knew he would win ahead of time instead of going into an engagement against his opponent's full strength.
Right.
Very cautious, and a master logistician. Logistics is just, for those of you who don't know, how you keep your army supplied. How do you get your food? How do you get your water?
Yep.
Right? How do you get your supplies?
It's basically every step you must take in order to win.
It's called the lifeblood of warfare for a reason.
Definitely.
Because if your armies can't eat, they can't win. It
Exactly.
doesn't matter how good of a commander you are. And he's a master planner, as I said. He could carry out 2 front wars at the same time, right?
Very impressive.
He would make sure that every battle suited the way in which he fought, right? Control access to castles, control access to water, and watch the army starve. So, also a gentleman. There was one time during a siege, actually, funny anecdote, where he carried out a siege, but he knew that one of the royal commanders within the Crusader castle was getting married. So he said, okay, try your best not to disrupt the wedding party.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
that's adorable.
True gentleman. And he was magnanimous in victory almost always. So he would almost always let his opponents live, especially royalty, right? Executing only a choice few if they'd been especially cruel. And if he did have to execute, he wasn't. He generally wouldn't torture.
There seems to be a great deal of anecdotes regarding Saladin. He seems to be a very, I don't know if I'd say benevolent, but definitely a kindly man, a very gentlemanly man.
For the time, he was a gentleman.
Yes.
Yeah. Showed a lot of. When Baldwin, his greatest rival, was sick, he actually sent doctors over.
He did, yep. He sent him his physicians because he knew Christian physicians were only so good. He knew that his were far superior, and he sent them to him. Oh, for those of you who didn't know, Baldwin IV, who was indeed Saladin's greatest rival, he was at the time suffering from leprosy. So that is obviously a huge detriment, especially seeing how he died when he was in his 30s?
Yeah, very young, very young. So, his army for the tournament is going to be at his greatest victory, which is the Battle of Hotton, which we're going to be talking about later.
Yes.
So, not that big, 30,000 total, 12,000 cavalry, 1,800 infantry. Don't let the numbers deceive you. His cavalry is the most important thing he's bringing to the battle, right?
Interesting.
He's got gulams, which are elite slave soldiers, and Quara gulams, Turkish troops, right? Which would have been trained in the classical horse archer style. These troops were able to mock charge. They'd shoot arrows at you and then retreat and get out of you there. And they'd wait for you to break formation, turn around, boom, fire a second shot.
Seems like a very Mongol tactic.
Yeah, very much so. These are Turkic people.
Yes, Turkic people very much ingrained in the Central European steppe. So yes.
Now, those are his troops. He made use of Bedouins and a lot of skirmishing archer troops. He doesn't want to get bogged down in an infantry fight, right?
Right.
Armor mostly for his troops is going to be flexible, very light mail armor, sometimes with a mail cap. It's going to cover mostly the from neck to the upper thighs.
Right.
And weapons. A lot of his troops are going to be armed with the kite shield or the round shield. A straight sword with a nice cross guard, and maces were actually very common in Muslim armies. So amongst his infantry, they're going to be packing a lot of maces, a lot of shields, either a straight sword or a saber, right? And as far as his cavalry, we're getting a lot of composite and recurve bows for horse archers, and a lot of lancers holding a two-handed spear.
Right.
So that's mainly what he's bringing to the fight.
Light infantry and light cavalry.
Light infantry and light cavalry. A small minority of heavy cavalry, but mostly light infantry, light cavalry. Now, that's going to reflect in his tactics.
Yes.
He was a skirmisher, a master skirmisher.
Right.
Now, he would get his skirmishing troops, for those of you that don't know, are people that are going to... they're going to throw projectiles at you from a distance, right? From a long distance. They're going to throw projectiles. His horses are going to come and throw javelins, or they're going to shoot arrows at you, and they're going to wait for you to break formation. Either for enough of you to get worn down throughout the skirmishing, they would do this in successive waves, wave after wave after wave. And if you break and gaps open up in your line, that's when they're going to charge and exploit that gap. And they're going to wear you down. Or you'll get frustrated and charge at them out of order. And that's when the cavalry comes in with their lancers. Lancers are troops with those spears, and they're just going to mow you the fuck down.
Very much the useful tactic. Definitely the bane of many crusaders.
So he is very patient, and he will wear you down. He's a master skirmisher. And cavalry is by far the most important element to his army.
Right.
The light infantry is mostly just for follow-up, skirmishing in and of itself.
Right.
But, yeah, cavalry is the pinnacle of his army. So, some notable victories. He defeated the assassins, right? The Hashashin. He was able to fight them in a siege battle. And
we should talk about the Hashashin more so in other segments. Because
Definitely
they're
other segments.
Very fascinating.
The siege of Mosul, but the most important I want to talk about is the Battle of Hotton. So, this was versus Raymond III of Tripoli. Brilliantly, what he did was attacked a castle. This is when I said he was a master planner and a master strategist, and he would always frame the battle in a way that he would win. The Battle of Hotton is a perfect example of it. So Saladin, the Crusader king Raymond III of Tripoli, has been advised by all of his generals, do not go out of the castle. If you go out of the castle, we lose. So Saladin finds the castle where his wife is staying, a separate castle, and sieges it to force him into the field.
Of course.
His honor demands it. So As he marches to try and get to his wife's castle to rescue her, Saladin cuts off his access to all of the water. With his superior mobility, he cuts off Raymond's access to water and to any surrounding settlements, and just makes him march through the desert for days and days. And as he's marching through the desert, his troops are approaching him and skirmishing, shooting arrows at him. His troops are getting lower and lower morale. They're getting worn down. Finally, they're forced to camp in the desert, and Saladin surrounds him.
Oh boy.
He starts lighting grass on fire, so that the smoke blows into Raymond's heavily armored troops
Oh jeez.
and dehydrates them even further. He's skirmishing and shooting arrows and wearing them down, taunting them with sacks of water. Raymond, in the end, is forced to make a desperate charge. And he's encircled on all sides, and all but 7,000? All but 3,000 of his 20,000 troops are massacred.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Certain select nobles were able to break out, but in all, it was a massacre. So,
That's not a victory. That's a complete destruction. My god.
yeah. And that's the kind of tactic Saladin ideally would bring in a desert battle to this fight. Knowing the terrain, being able to exploit it, and being able to fight a battle in the way that he doesn't have to fight, like Sun Tzu said.
And of course, knowing his enemy. Raymond and Saladin have been engaged in battle before this. So of course, Saladin is well versed in what his enemy would be doing. You know, essentially knowing that sieging his wife's castle.
Now, notable losses. We can talk about those later, but
He's got them.
he has losses. He's not an undefeated commander, so that's going to be interesting. Now, Shahab, perhaps you'd like to discuss Khosrow now, his opponent.
Absolutely. So, Khosrow Shirwan. Now, this will be a criminally short bio, but for the sake of this video, I think it's more than appropriate. So, he was the emperor, the Shah, the king of kings in the Sasanian Empire from the years 531 to 579, and he is the successor of his father Kavad I, and ultimately very an effective king. He is known as perhaps one of, if not the greatest reformist throughout Iranian history. And he would lay the foundations and constructions for many cities as well as many places of learning. The city of Esfahan was one of his greatest accomplishments throughout history, as well as his sons going forward. Now, because of his deep commitment to learning and philosophy and all things of education, he was given the pseudonym of the Philosopher King, which is a very honorary title among the very many honorary titles that he has been bestowed. And among his taxations and his intricacies with political reform, but you don't really care about any of that. You're here to learn how good he was at fighting people. And he was really good at that. So we'll get into that more right about now. So, as far as his traits go, I have given him the traits of great builder. As I said, he laid down the foundation and construction of opulent cities, palaces, and of course places of learning, libraries, universities. The Philosopher King, as well, he brought in learning and knowledge from all walks of life, all over the world, anywhere he could get his hands on, from China, even Byzantium itself, any learners that he could find there, he brought them into Persia. And he was given the title of Anushiravan in Old Persian, which means the immortal soul. He was given this by the Zoroastrian clergy because of his stalwart championism of Zoroastrianism. But of course, this is a detriment as well because he was, at times, if not for the most part, overzealous in his stalwartness towards Zoroastrianism, because he would take very swift and deadly action against any who he thought would be a threat to the Zoroastrian clergy, and by definition, the monarchy itself. For example, the Mazdakites, we'll talk more about them later, but nevertheless, they were a threat to the Zoroastrians, and he butchered them for the most part.
Seems like a bit of a double-edged sword in that if you believe you're on kind of a divinely ordained mission, right? Part of you is you're going to be audacious as fuck.
Oh, absolutely.
You're going to be willing to, do battle when it doesn't necessarily favor you. You're going to just have so much confidence in your ability to win, but at the same time, you could have delusions of grandeur.
And I think this is more talking about internally, like the threats of the religious threats that were arising internally. For example, though it was definitely a minority, in the Sasanian Empire, Christianity was becoming a more heavily popularized faith, just as in Byzantium, Zoroastrianism was becoming a heavily popularized faith. Khosrow didn't mind the Christians existing within his empire because they weren't a direct threat until his son was starting to convert and wanting to become king himself. And then he took action and imprisoned his son. So I don't think it's necessarily he thought himself as a divinely ordained warrior of God.
Okay.
It's just more that he needed the clergy in power so that they could keep him in power, and thus the
Right.
balance was kept.
Okay, very much a strategic
Yeah, very much a strategic
marriage
move,
between
right.
church and state.
Yeah,
Got
very
it.
much that. And among others, he is ambitious. He has foreseen the possibly the most prosperous reign of the Sasanian Empire for his time. He is a great reformist, already talked about that. And of course, he is a war master. Under his reign, the Sassanid Empire has seen more war with its neighboring states than any other throughout time. And for the most part, he is rather prosperous in those campaigns. And of course, not just as a war master, but as a siege master. Just as Saladin, a lot of Khosrow's military accomplishments were actually siege warfare. He has besieged many cities successfully, and has indeed brought down some of Byzantium's greatest, most powerful fortified cities, save Constantinople. Never was able to break that one.
That's what, okay, this is something when you were introducing him to me as a figure that surprised me about him, is that I hadn't heard of Khosrow, but he's not a lightweight.
Definitely not.
He defeated Justinian, who's one of the best Roman military commanders, led an expedition to conquer back most of Italy.
Yep.
He defeated, who's the other one?
Belisarius.
Belisarius. Yeah, this man has defeated many, many Roman armies in the field.
Definitely.
And Roman armies were some of the most advanced of their days.
Roman armies at the time, the Byzantine armies, they had if not the strongest infantry in the entirety of the world. Their infantry was strong enough to essentially retake back what was at the time Rome in Italy against the many hordes that were usurping that territory. Under the leadership of Belisarius, and of course with the divine grace of Justinian. And on top of everything else, besides being a master strategist, he was a otherwise benevolent king. He was very well known for being a very kindly king, as well as very generous towards his citizens. And not just to his citizens, but to the citizens of other places. For example, I'm talking about anecdotes. There was a point where Khosrow successfully laid siege to the city of Antioch. And just to poke fun at Justinian for being an inefficient king in his eyes, what he did was he took those people who were defeated in the citizenry in Antioch, freed them from their bondages, from their slavery, from their war criminalization, and built for them a brand new Antioch. And not just a new city. Oh no, he recreated Antioch further in his borders. And just to point another middle finger at Justinian, he called this new city Way Antioch Khosrow, literally meaning Khosrow's better Antioch.
What a dick.
He recreated it so perfectly that when a man asked, when Khosrow approached the man who had lived in that house, Khosrow asked him, "Do you like your new house?" The man responded, "Oh yes, I love it, but I do miss my oak tree that I had in my backyard." The man goes to sleep, wakes up the next morning, and wouldn't you know it, finds an oak tree in his backyard.
That's crazy.
Yep, that's the kind of man Khosrow was.
Man, that's insane.
Yeah, interesting fellow indeed.
Yeah, it's such attention to detail, such Jesus. Now let's talk a little bit more about his military reforms. What was his army like?
Now, from what we understand, our meager understanding of what Khosrow's army was, we know that his reforms definitely didn't just go from the state and taxation as well as the construction, but also into the military. Now, from what we know, he managed to take away the grants and powers from all the neighboring feudal states and lords and brought the army back into the fold of the state under his particular authority. Under his leadership, the foot soldiers became much more heavily regimented as well as heavily armored, and even had variations among themselves.
Okay.
So the infantry would be heavy when they needed to be, in direct confrontation as shock troopers, as well they were light and fast when they needed to be, especially in desert combat.
Interesting.
And one of the things that Khosrow definitely was heavily favored towards was his archers. The archers were, we'll talk about the tactics afterwards, but the archers having long composite bows for the most part, as well as recurve bows, because if you see in the reliefs, recurve bows have existed in Persia for a great deal of time. So, with his core of light and heavy infantry, his archers, he had one, if not two, of his greatest assets in all of his military campaigns, and those were the Aswara, or the Savaran cavalry. These, for those of you who don't know, are better known as Persian cataphracts. And for those of you who still don't know, cataphracts are essentially an ancient form of heavily armed, heavily armored men on horseback.
Think of like a tank of a battlefield.
Essentially.
These men are heavily armed. Their horses are heavily armed. They're lancers with a massive spear.
Absolutely.
They're the shock troops. These are the ones that are going to charge the enemy lines and break open holes
100%.
that the infantry is going to run in and exploit.
Yep.
Just a charge of metal and horse and fucking spears that you can't defend against.
And these were the most honorable, the most highly prestigious warriors, soldiers in the entirety of the Sassanid Empire. And these are, in many ways, the progenitors for the European knights. And in other ways, the progenitors for the kind of warriors that Saladin would have faced in the field of battle.
Right.
Now, among the Aswara, or the Savaran cavalry, they, as well, just as the infantry, also had variations among themselves. The Aswara had cavalry archers, very much similar to what Saladin's bringing to the field. Very lightly armored and lightly armed cavalrymen who were specialized in fighting in desert warfare, especially around the Arabian Peninsula, in the Lakhman and Ghaznavid territory, which is about the Fertile Crescent, around that area. So, these men who had multiple variants, bow variants, lance variants, sword and bow, as well as varying degrees of cavalry among themselves, all together with their armies and their multitudes, were actually very useful in the field of combat. But his best asset, I think, Khosrow himself rode on a war elephant and had a contingent of war elephants.
How many are we talking here?
Well, not many. I'd imagine as many as 20 at most.
20 war elephants?
Yeah, as well as his own personal war elephant, giving him a bird's eye view of the entire battle round, no matter where he is.
And how many troops is he bringing in total?
Altogether, we're talking. It's a little difficult to estimate, seeing as how Sassanid's population was always very low.
Okay.
But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in discipline, as well as loyalty to the crown. These were the soldiers that would be the last to run from the field of battle. And we're talking about 45,000 to about 50,000.
Still outnumbering Saladin?
Yep. That's about his...
mostly cavalry? Or about half-half?
I'd say about
infantry?
1/3 infantry, and the rest of it cavalry and elephants, yes.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'd say 1/3 infantry, 1/3 archers, and the rest are the varying cavalry that they have there.
So classic Persian army. Heavy favoritism on cavalry and archers,
Yep,
right?
definitely.
Persian infantry, never the cream of the crop.
No,
But-
that was never their strength. No.
Never their strong suit. Persian infantry, always running up against heavily armed Greek or Roman infantry, would be crushed. But their cavalry was elite, right?
Very much so.
Horse archers and heavy cavalry was elite, used in beautiful combination. Shoot them down with the horse archers, they chase and follow you. Hit them hard with the heavy cavalry and
Yep.
mow them down.
There's a perfect combination of light cavalry, who were indeed played the role of skirmishers, and then the heavy cavalry, who played up the role of destroying everything in their path.
Yeah.
And I love it.
It's like a nest of bees hitting you, right?
And then the bear comes in right after.
Yeah. The bear who's been guarding the tree comes in right after,
Yep.
as you're distracted by swatting, the bees flying around your head.
Definitely.
Yeah, interesting.
Oh yeah. Very powerful stuff. Now, as far as his notable victories, and his tactics, we'll talk more about those later.
The war elephants I'm interested by. I didn't
Yeah.
realize that we have those. That's a big question mark in this battle.
Indeed, yeah. And that's the problem, though. These are war elephants that are definitely not used to the kind of climate that we're going to be bringing our combatants into.
No.
But they're large beasts. Maybe they'll be able to adapt. Who knows? Anyway, so as far as his most notable victories, I'd say when Khosrow led an expedition towards Byzantine-controlled Armenia. Rather, no, the other way around. Byzantium launched an assault on Persian-controlled Armenia, and they laid siege to the cities of Edessa, in which Khosrow completely destroyed them at that particular battle. And the victory was so great that it forced Justinian to end his generals at the time to sign a peace treaty with him that heavily favored Khosrow. They paid yearly fiefs of great massive sums of gold, and later on in the campaigns, what else do we have here? Oh, of course. Now, this one requires a little bit of explanation. Now, Justinian's predecessor, Marcellus, I believe, he built a city, a fortification really, on the fringes of Sasanian territory near I believe it's near Armenia, current-day Armenia. And this place was called Dara. Now, Dara, at the time, was just a meager fortification. By the time Justinian took hold of the empire in Byzantium, he turned that tiny little fortification that was just supposed to poke fun at the Persians and turn it into a massive fortified fortress. Something that would continuously repel Persian invasion. Now, one of Khosrow's greatest accomplishments in his entire military campaign was taking that city, once and for all, from Byzantium. A defeat that was so horrible that it drove Justinian to the point of madness. He was actually driven to high lows of depression, so great that it was his wife, Sophia, who had to take reins of the empire afterwards.
Jesus.
Yeah, imagine that.
That's crazy.
Now, talking about his greatest defeats, I'd say it'd be around his attempted sack of Theodosiopolis. Forgive my pronunciation. Now, this was a failed campaign altogether because his forces were driven back, but his greatest defeat happened when he was sacking the undefended city of Melitene. Now, this city was being plundered and pillaged, as it were, and then Sophia's generals surrounded Khosrow, forcing him to flee across the Euphrates. While being attacked from the Byzantines in the rear, Khosrow suffered major casualties. So great, in fact, that Khosrow wrote a law that his descendants would never be allowed to lead their troops in battle ever again.
Shit, man.
Yeah. So this guy doesn't take defeat very well, but he takes victory like a champ.
So, interestingly enough, Saladin's got a very similar defeat against Baldwin IV. Spreads out his troops, starts trying to destroy the landscape, the farms, because if you know anything about the Kingdom of Jerusalem, you got heavily fortified castles, right, with farms outside of them. If you destroy the farms, you destroy their access to food, you win. Baldwin IV, the Leper King, assembles a smaller force of 10,000 to Saladin's 26,000.
Right.
And while he's bogged down in raiding these towns, and his supply line stuck in the mud, Baldwin rolls him up like a carpet, attacking individual forces that are split off and splintered, and drives Saladin out with massive, massive, massive casualties.
Oh, jeez. How many numbers for Saladin after the battle?
26,000 to Baldwin's 10.
Well, definitely not his highest numbers, but still.
No.
Wait, to Baldwin's 10?
10,000.
Jeez, he outnumbered him nearly 3-1 and he lost?
Yeah, that's right. That's his greatest
Wow.
defeat. And again, same kind of mistake. Carelessness, not skirmishing, but raiding perhaps when he shouldn't have, and just gets caught with his pants down.
Yeah.
Which is interesting for two very, that's one of their big defeats, and these are commanders that are very, scrupulous otherwise, make
Right.
sure all their I's are crossed and their T's are dotted.
Right. Sheesh.
So, seeing as this battle is in,
Peruvian jungle with the clearing?
I'm going to say it's a chance encounter. You know what a chance battle is?
No preparation?
Yeah,
Right,
both
yeah.
sides just run into each other.
Yeah.
I'm going to say these two sides, for one reason or another, are marching in the dense Peruvian jungle, and their scouts encounter each other in this clearing, right?
I like
the
it.
scouts run into each other, they do battle, more or less a draw, they run back to each other's sides. Hey, there's a massive army of, X number of troops on the other side. And both armies meet in this massive clearing on either sides of the jungle. Now,
Who would be the first to engage who?
I got to take a shroom break.
All right. We'll be right back.
Quick intermission.
Enjoy. And we are...
Well,
And we're back.
we're black. So I'm like we said, I'm envisioning a chance encounter here. Their scouts meet up. Their scouts start fighting. Go back. Oh shit! There's a gigantic army here on the other side of the Peruvian jungle for whatever fucking reason. And there, at the edge of the clearing, is Khosrow and his army, and Saladin and his 30,000.
Jeez.
Yeah. So I'm picturing the beginning phases of this battle for Saladin, at least, as a very cautious general. He'd probably see these troops skirmish a lot, right?
Oh, yeah.
start unloading arrows, similar to what he did at the Battle of Arsuf. He'd probably get his skirmishers on foot to come, throw some projectiles, some slings, some javelins, and then follow it up with his horse archers retreat, keeping his infantry in reserve and his heavy cavalry in reserve. Very, very cautious. Just kind of pick at the enemy, see what happens from there.
Yeah. Now, the general strategy that Sasanian kings and generals have often undertaken is that what they want to do is when they engage their enemy, they definitely want their infantry to advance first and their archers to advance to the flanks, always to the flanks. So that way, the infantry can engage the enemy up front, and the archers will continuously pelt at them from the side, so that way the enemy sort of converges inward, making them right into a sweet little spot.
Interesting.
Then as the enemy converges more and more tightly into formation, then they send in their shock troopers, then they send in the Aswaran cavalry. That's when they mow down the adversaries to the most utter extent. Not even the most heavily armed Byzantine infantry was able to stand up properly against the Savaran cavalry. Now, that's the general tactic, that's the general strategy. That's, of course, something that Khosrow would probably not do, especially given the circumstances. They're both in the middle of a very unfamiliar jungle, very unfamiliar temperature, climate altogether. So definitely they're going to be picking at each other with arrows more so than
unfamiliar opponent. Yeah, very cautious, long feeling out process. I'm assuming. So that's interesting though. He would try and funnel you into his infantry.
Yep.
But it's a trap. Around comes the cavalry on the flank and mows you down once you're in close order.
Actually, not the flank. What they do is they'd have the archers at the flank, and they'd keep the action mostly with the infantry up front. Then the infantry disperses. The cavalry moves in and takes the place of the infantry and mows down them right in the middle.
Interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
That's the general tactic that the Sasanians would undertake.
Wait, so the cavalry goes up the middle?
Yep, up the
for
middle.
A frontal assault.
Yep.
Wow, interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
Because that way they knew that the enemy's being pelted at from arrows from the sides. So that way they're going to continuously try to get away from the arrows further and further inward.
Okay.
Yeah. And that way the cavalry will just mow in right from the center. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if it comes down to it, because this is obviously a battlefield that doesn't favor a lot. I mean, obviously you can skirmish for a certain amount of time, but I'm picturing something that's closed off.
This is going to be hot climate. So honestly, I really doubt that the Savaran cavalry are going to be playing any charging roles in here, because Khosrow's going to be on top of his elephant. He's going to see the landscape. This is very soft earth. This is very soft dirt. So if you see a charge going in, chances are the horses are going to slip and fall or just plant their hooves too far deep into the dirt. So chances are he's going to hold off on the charge, knowing that he is indeed a master strategist. However, that being said, I'm not too sure just how long these two combatants can keep up the arrows, seeing as how they're definitely going to run out of ammunition at some
Eventually,
point.
yeah. Especially, this is kind of a place that doesn't favor either.
No, they're completely in neutral
They're
territory.
both masters at keeping their army supplied with arrows, and I know that the Persians in history would bring up, baggage trains.
Absolutely, lots
with
of transportation.
arrows, right? Baggage trains keep their troops supplied so they can keep skirmishing. But that's not going to be the case here.
Nope.
They're not going to be familiar with the terrain. They're not going to be familiar with the roads. If it was Atahualpa who was here, and the Incas, he'd be able to keep his troops supplied via the roads that he's familiar with.
Yep.
But this is a chance encounter in the middle of a fucking jungle, right?
Yeah.
So both sides, in my view, are going to have no clue how to keep them supplied. They're both on a clock here, right?
Very much so.
There's hot weather, unfamiliar terrain, it's humid, they're going to be exhausted, and they're going to run out of arrows eventually.
Oh yeah.
Right? This is
Bad
not
news.
a place where they can skirmish indefinitely, and this is not a place where they can move around quite a bit. Right?
Yeah. So, really does come to the question of who makes the first move. Who will be the one to take the fight directly at the enemy? And I'm not too sure who would take that initiative first.
Yeah, I'm going to say Saladin's going to be very cautious, and he's going to skirmish until his enemy makes a mistake.
Right.
This is not a guy who's going to send in his... he's using mostly light cavalry, for God's sake, for his melee cavalry. Light lancers, with a backup sword.
I suppose he's going to look at Khosrow's army, see the heavily armored cavalry, the heavily armored infantry, and all the archers and the elephants. He's definitely going to keep his distance first, for sure.
How are the elephants going to play a role?
I have no idea. See, knowing that Khosrow is at least taking one elephant with him, if not the contingent, 12 to 20, I'm not too sure what they're going to do in this particular battle.
I'm going to say that they're going to stay in reserve for most of the battle. I think elephants they're excellent weapons, but they're fucking temperamental as shit.
Yeah, especially in that hot weather that they're definitely not used to. The humidity in and of itself will be a huge detriment to everyone involved.
Yeah,
especially the heavily armored cavalry. They're going to be sweating balls in there. It's going to be terrible.
I'm going to say the elephants are going to be kept in reserve because I think they're going to be as much a detriment to his own troops, Khosrow's own troops, as they are going to be to the enemies.
Yeah.
As unpredictable as they are, their elephants are good at one thing: charge forward, right, at an unsuspecting enemy, and just mow them down. But here, elephants don't always do what they're told, especially when they're pissed off.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to say Khosrow is going to realize that because, the Persians have been using elephants in warfare for thousands of years.
Sure.
And they were, them and the Indians were masters at it. So I'm going to say he's going to keep his elephants in reserve. They're not going to play a big factor in this battle.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fair estimate.
I'm just thinking...
who would make the first move in this engagement?
Saladin's got very light infantry, and he's always going to keep them in reserve until the crucial moment.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Khosrow's going to make the first move.
It's possible, though. Khosrow, speaking historically, the Sasanians have always adapted a very defensive strategy. Speaking as how they're always on the because of their low population, due to any number of factors, they're generally taking the defensive stance here because they know that against a better equipped, a larger force, they definitely need to hold off. I'm not too sure if Khosrow's going to immediately feel out exactly how large Saladin's army is. I mean, he might, but I'm not too sure, especially considering that it's a completely unfamiliar enemy in an unfamiliar territory. Can't really get past that. That's the problem. This particular...
It's difficult.
Yeah.
No.
Because these two are highly learned men, schooled in the art of war, and definitely have lots of experience under their names. So I definitely don't think that either of them are going to rush into a ridiculous battle. However, it's definitely possible that Khosrow will take the first move, only just to see what the next move will be.
Right. I'm going to give my edge to Khosrow so far. I think we're boxed in here in the jungles. There's not much... there's not very far you can go. If you do try and recede into the jungles, at least with these types of armies, you're going to be forced to break formation. Your enemy is going to mow you down.
Yeah.
So that's not an option. I feel like a frontal infantry charge for Saladin is not an option. Khosrow's got more heavily armored troops, right? He's got heavy infantry. I feel like on this terrain, there's only so long that Saladin can skirmish, and I feel like he's not going to be able to follow up those attacks. I feel like once his skirmishers run out of arrows and eventually become exhausted, I feel like at an opportune time, after wave upon wave of skirmishing and Khosrow trying to assume more of a defensive posture, I feel like his heavy... What was the name of his heavy cavalry again?
The Savaran cavalry.
The Savaran cavalry. They're more or less like cataphracts, right?
Very much so, yes.
I feel like he's going to wait for Saladin's skirmishers to overcommit, like at the Battle of Arsuf, and I feel like at that point, his superiority in numbers and his heavy cavalry is just going to win the day, and he's going to mow down that first line of skirmishers, putting the rest of the troops to rout.
It's possible, very much possible. Well, so far Khosrow has the advantage, but who knows how long that might last. Saladin is famous for being able to outlast his enemy, if nothing else.
He is.
So, in my opinion, the question really comes down to who succumbs to the heat first.
Who succumbs to the heat? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And who loses their nerve?
Yeah.
Man, the heat and the humidity and the unfamiliar climate.
And, I'm not too sure how thirsty they'll be, but I'm imagining they'll be pretty goddamn thirsty.
How do you think Saladin, what would his be, if you envisioned him winning, what would his path to victory be?
His only path to victory will be in his light cavalry. He has to, I'd imagine Khosrow's first move will definitely be sending in his infantry first, and his archers, at least one contingent of his archers. So, probe in the enemy at the front, hammer the enemy from the back, and that's how it's going to begin. The only way Saladin can take on that first wave, and possibly the entire battle, has to rely on his light cavalry. Because they're generally very faster, very light, so they won't be too bothered by the terrain altogether, and they definitely will be able to go weave in and out of the enemy formation.
But here's the thing, Khosrow's got light cavalry as well.
He does, yeah.
And they're numerous.
Yeah.
And he has horse archers as well.
Yes, he does. I'm not too sure if it's going to turn into a battle of light cavalry, but talking about their high adaptability, it might turn into a slugfest if Khosrow is the one that loses his nerve first. The only way I see Saladin winning is if he baits his enemy into doing a foolhardy, full-on charge into his own flank, and that way he can just exploit all the weaknesses of that foolhardy charge.
I think it's a stretch. I got to be honest with you. In a different territory, in the desert,
Yeah,
I would see Saladin winning.
Sure.
Because he can have the heavy cavalry essentially run them off the field.
yeah,
Just
definitely.
lure them into a chase and have them chase his own light cavalry off the field into a point of exhaustion. But we're not dealing with that here.
No.
We're boxed in. We're in the jungle, right?
Yeah,
I really think at a certain point, Saladin's not going to be able to skirmish indefinitely, and I think that cavalry is going to going to be able to box in his light cavalry
Definitely.
and just overrun him.
Yeah.
And I think once Saladin has lost his light cavalry, I don't think his light infantry, his swordsmen, and his spearmen and his soldiers wielding maces, they're not going to be able to stand up to. These are soldiers that are basically they're armored with light mail.
yeah.
Right? I don't know how experienced they are in anti-cav tactics, but in this particular circumstance, I don't see Saladin winning. I don't know about you. I don't see him having a path to victory.
Really, me neither. It's so strange how Khosrow has almost every advantage here in a place where there's no advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just his heavier troops, I think, win the day.
Yeah.
I think this is a battle of attrition. In a battle of desert attrition, my money's on Saladin. But in these unfamiliar circumstances, you're confined. It's a phone booth fight, essentially.
Essentially, yeah.
The heavy troops are going to win the day. Once Saladin overcommits just a little, he's going to be overtaken. And then it's a battle of an army with cavalry against an army without cavalry.
Essentially, yeah. And in that way, yeah.
I think we're ready to call this one.
Yep,
that was
looks like-
surprising. Based on the terrain, that was surprisingly easy. I didn't know how that would go, but
Unfortunately, that very much is the case. Khosrow Anushirwan claims this very interesting victory over Saladin al-Ayyubi.
so Khosrow is able to run the light cavalry off the field, rout them. He moves forward in a forward advance.
Yeah. Takes on the very typical, very ancient, archaic pincer move with his archers on each flank, hammers his enemy to pieces, lets the infantry move in, sort of soften him up, and finally with the heavy cavalry moves in and takes the killing blow.
I think this battle is going to be one where you have numerous people dropping dead on the field.
Absolutely, just from sheer exhaustion.
Just from sheer exhaustion and dehydration. I don't think any army really escapes this battle unscathed.
No.
This is going to be a Pyrrhic victory, but it's a victory, I think.
Yep, very much so.
Okay. Saladin advances to the losers bracket. He's a loser.
He has been eliminated.
So,
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, my brother.
All right. I
So-
think we're out of time for this particular segment. We'll be right back with our second matchup.
Just going to advance him. Wow, that was... Huh.
And we're live.
And we're dead. Okay, so next up, that was pretty handy. I just
Very
adjusted the bracket. We're going to show you that on screen.
Yes, sir.
Khosrow advances. He's our first person into round 2 of our tournaments. And
You know,
Saladin,
I'm not gonna lie. I'm both exhilarated and disappointed because honestly, I was rooting for really either of these combatants.
Me too.
I adore both of these combatants.
And-
Saladin was one of my heroes growing up.
Honestly-
and Khosrow became one of my more contemporary academic figureheads
Yeah.
of heavy study. So I don't know.
I just feel like Saladin, it was like the Battle of Arsif where he...
Khosrow the first.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, I can adjust that after. I feel like Saladin, given better territory, would have succeeded a lot better.
It's possible. Oh yeah, definitely.
But this was a phone booth fight, essentially. And
Essentially.
in a phone booth fight, the more heavily armed troops are just going to win.
Yeah.
It's disappointing, but fortunately, because we're doing double elimination, we're going to get to see Saladin again. And he could succeed. He's one of my favorite figures as well in history. But
Yeah.
who knows? He's going to be up against the loser of our next one, which is William the Conqueror
This is Atahualpa.
versus Atahualpa. Very, very interesting matchup. Numbers.
Who shall we start with, William or Atahualpa?
I mean, I started last time, so
All right, William it is.
Little Willie.
Little Willie. Alrighty then. So, William the First, by name William the Conqueror, or William the Bastard, or William of Normandy. Really, he's got a whole bunch of names. Basically, it's William of X. Now, he was born in 1028 in Falaise, Normandy, France. He died in September 9th, 1087 in Rouen. Duke of Normandy.
It's okay.
Okay. So, he is known as one of the greatest soldiers and rulers of the Middle Ages in its entirety. He made himself the mightiest noble in France and then changed the course of England's future with his conquest of the entire country, away from the Saxons, away from the seat of power in Wessex. Now, among his many traits, I have put commanding. He is a man who definitely led his men through the most trying of circumstances and the most difficult of times. But he is also tranquil within the storm. He definitely kept his calm and his resolve throughout the most terrifying battle in that entire skirmish, known as the Battle of Hastings, which we'll talk about more. However, he was as inspiring as he was dreadful. He inspired as much vigor and confidence in his men as he did absolute fear. This man, you did not want to get on his bad side. He was definitely the kind of guy who would butcher you if you did anything wrong in his eyes. He was authoritative, making him his claim as king of England, his claim as king of the Isle, was definitely not challenged by any of the people who served under him. He was innovative, making quick and light adjustments, and at the flip of a switch could definitely change tactics in the thick of battle. And he was very pious, very heavily Catholic, this man. And his military composition, well, he had a great deal of ships, but that will be irrelevant for this fight. Now,
Fuck the ships.
yeah, fuck the ships. Now,
Get your fucking ships out of here, mister.
because William the Conqueror is such a celebrated figure in literature and in the culture of Britain itself, his soldierly numbers are kind of exaggerated. They kind of range between 14,000 to 150,000. Chances are none of that's real. So, by modern estimates, historians have created a more reasonable range. Somewhere between 7,000 to 8,000 men. 1,000 of whom consisted of cavalry.
Wait, did you say 7,000 to 8,000?
7,000 to 8,000.
I thought he was working with 10,000 at least.
Well, it could have been around 10,000. It's a little difficult to really measure, really. See, it says around here that 7,000 to 8,000 men, 1,000 of whom were cavalry, 1,000 to 2,000 were cavalry.
This is at Hastings.
This is at Hastings, yeah.
That's it?
Yeah.
8,000.
Yeah. Although it says that other estimates somewhere between 10 and 12,000, with if you include the entirety of his infantry and cavalry and archers altogether.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, but otherwise, very tiny force.
10,000 still, that's it. That's
Yeah.
tiny, man.
Yeah.
That
That was the majority. That was the bulk of his troop when in the Battle of Hastings. Now, this as far as the sort of make of the early Middle Ages goes, he was working with a very rudimentary steel or heavy iron, heavily crafted iron, and his soldiers would be wearing metal helmets, tunics made of chainmail. Heavy infantry wore plate mail.
very heavily armored.
Yeah, very heavily armored plate mail. But his infantry, definitely the strongest faction of his entire army. These men wore huge, massive two-handed, not kite shields rather. So these guys were broad shields, I think that is what they called them.
Yeah.
Yeah, be able to plant them firmly in the ground and even be able to stack them on top of others, which would...
With a boss in the center, a big, like, I guess, metal, almost like a round metal half ball.
Sort of like a stud almost. Yeah, right in the
so these
center.
things are a weapon as well.
Oh, yeah,
They're
very much
offensive
so.
and defensive weapons.
Definitely. And of course the infantry would use javelins, long spears, swords, double-edged, always. And of course, the bread and butter of the English army was the longbowman, something that was definitely utilized by William the Conqueror.
Revolutionary in his hands.
Absolutely. Now, talking about his tactics as well as his notable victories, of which there's really only one, he has, well, let me just describe it for you. 2 words. Shield wall. This man was famous. Now, the shield wall tactic has been used in the English Isle since around the 7th century during the Danelaw, when the Vikings first landed in in what we now call England, and waged war against Alfred the Great and the last kingdom of Wessex. Now, this strategy was used by both William the Conqueror, the Normans, as well as the Saxons under Harold Godwinson. Now, this is a very long, drawn-out battle. However, it definitely, for the long and short of it, it ended with William the Conqueror outmaneuvering Harold in almost every way, baiting him into a final confrontation that Harold was overconfident in, and ending with a Norman victory over the Saxons once and for all, resulting in the death of Harold himself. Now, this definitely comes... William the Conqueror definitely is a strong military commander, very strong head on his shoulders. He is just as renowned in naval warfare as he is in military warfare, and yeah, definitely a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, so we're talking heavily armored troops.
Definitely.
We're talking
heavy archers, heavy bows, and
elite bows.
Yep.
Yeah, so very small number of troops, but elite quality.
Oh yes.
Thick shields.
And of course, the famous shield wall formation, unbreakable, especially if used properly.
Unbreakable, with archers firing over the top of it, right? So elite in every way. Swords and spears, axes, right? Everything made out of steel or iron.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very formidable force, but small. 10,000. And that's where literally we're coming up against basically his inverse.
Tell me, buddy.
Atahualpa.
Go for it.
So the last Incan emperor ran maybe the largest empire in all of South America, South and North America, before the conquest of the Europeans. So he defeated his brother, the reigning king, Huascar, in a massive civil war that basically tore the empire apart.
Jeez.
Pitted two sides of the Incan Empire. And this is an empire that spanned from Ecuador in the north all the way down to Chile and Argentina in the south. Massive empire. And it was able to command huge numbers of troops. So his reign met an end when he encountered the Spanish under Francisco Pizarro. When the Spanish came, and with very small number of troops, but also technologically advanced with gunpowder, were able to take down an entire empire and diseases, not to mention that.
Oh yeah. A very common trait among the Spanish in the Americas. Go in there with your guns, with your steel, and your diseases.
Gun, germs, and steel, my friend.
Yes, sir.
Now, we're not going to be factoring that in, even though they developed at a time where gunpowder existed. Their armies developed in complete isolation. So they might as well have existed in the year, like, 1000 BC.
Might as well.
Even though they were around in the 1400s.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the technology was very reminiscent of a Stone Age technology. Yes?
Very much so, yeah. With few, we'll get into that, but very few metal weapons. So that's going to be interesting.
But there were metal weapons, is what you're saying. They did have them?
Very few, and they were copper.
Oh, copper.
There were some copper axes.
Right, okay. Wow.
So his execution would bring about the end of the empire, but let's talk about his traits. So daring is what I have here first.
Okay.
In order to lead a civil war against your brother, the reigning king, in order to take power, you got to be daring as fuck.
Oh, I'd imagine.
And he thought himself a living god.
Wow.
So that's going to make you even more daring and ballsy. He went out to meet the Spanish when they landed at Cajamarca and encountered the Incan emperor. They might as well have been fucking aliens. And this man went out with his army in a delegation. He's like, yeah, I'll go meet them in their tent. Can you imagine that?
Oh, jeez.
Literally no knowledge of Europe, Asia, anything that's existing. This random force of people lands on your beaches and like, we want to speak to your emperor. It's like, yeah, I'll speak to the alien delegation. No big deal. That's literally what would be the equivalent. So this man is daring and fearless, considering himself a god. So
Definitely detriment to himself.
Definitely. Oh, yeah. He was a logistician. Now, I didn't know this about the Incan Empire, but they were thoroughly more modern than I expected in some ways, and thoroughly more archaic in some ways.
Okay.
One way in which they were very modern.
Okay, right back. We're going to edit all this out. Pizza's almost here.
Pizza's almost here?
Yes, sir.
Oh, pizza. Sphere. So, we were just talking, sorry about the technical delay.
Apologies.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Lattes.
We were just talking about Atahualpa. So, logistician. In a lot, like I was saying, in a lot of ways, the Incan army was a lot more modern than I expected, a lot more archaic than I expected.
Oh, yeah.
So, excellent system of roads and forts within his empire. If he ends up fighting in Peru, he's going to have access to these roads. His army is going to be well supplied, and logistics is the lifeblood of warfare. That's just it.
That's very much the case.
He's going to be able to keep his army in the field longer and better and have better knowledge of the terrain if this is the case.
And what about his numbers? How many soldiers is he bringing to the battlefield?
Oh man, I'll get into that in a second with Commander of Nations. He could field an army of up to 100,000.
Holy.
Yeah, and it was not unheard of 200,000 man armies in the Incan Empire.
Jeez.
Yeah. That's why I've called him a true commander of nations.
Enormous.
Yeah,
Wow.
massive.
It's probably the greatest army we have in this entire bracket, damn. Well, besides one other.
Besides one other, which we'll get into, but as far as sheer size, he brings numbers to the battlefield. And another thing I have under Commander of Nations is that he was able to field many different types of troops as well, because each battalion that was recruited, 2 battalions recruited from each nation under the Incan Empire, and each would fight in its own style of warfare. So he's bringing many unique styles of warfare into this tournament,
Right.
which we can discuss in a second. So, some negatives. Stranger to cavalry. This man does not know what the fuck a horse is until the Spanish use them to plow them down in numbers. No cavalry.
That's one thing that William's going to be bringing, so that's going to be a wild card. for
Yeah.
him.
Massive numbers, no cavalry. So, to deal with cavalry against the Spanish, they use the terrain against them, build ditches, try and interrupt and funnel the cavalry into their infantry, and make the terrain inhospitable for cavalry. But ultimately, you need cavalry to beat cavalry.
Right.
So, master of terrains. The Incan army fought in the jungle. It fought in the desert, mountains, the highlands, the swamps. So that's an advantage he's bringing, that he's able to navigate many different kinds of terrain.
True.
Stranger to night battles. Believe it or not, it was against Incan religious...
Custom practice?
Yeah, custom. Against religious custom to fight at night. So they
Wow.
wouldn't fight night battles for one reason or another.
How interesting.
Yeah. Disciplined. Armies were drilled. This surprised me. The armies were drilled and disciplined. They had to stay in their unit at all times on the march. They were trained. They had a professional corps of officers. Not necessarily all soldiers were professional, but they had conscription. Mandatory conscription for men between the ages of, I think it was like 18 and 50. So mandatory conscription and a professional officer corps. That surprised me.
Interesting.
And then stranger to elite armies. Now, a lot of the armies they're going to be fighting are disorganized, that they have been fighting are disorganized and would rout fairly quickly.
Right.
They would just welt under the discipline and sheer numbers of the Incan army.
So they're definitely not facing any staunch resistance, no stalwart defense.
Not for a while in their history,
I wonder how they'd fare against an army that's more professional
Yeah.
than what they're used to.
And repeller of ambushes. Excellent at repelling ambushes because they had to deal with that frequently throughout their empire.
Right.
So, army composition. You've got, under Atahualpa, other great generals as well commanding with his army. I'm not
Right.
even going to try and pronounce their names.
Yeah, that's gonna be a difficult one.
It's-
Do excuse our pronunciation of certain words. Where he's white, I'm brown.
If you don't like it, fuck off. So, each nation fought as an individual unit within, right? Obviously, not exactly the combined arms tactics of Alexander, but they bring their own style of warfare to the army.
Well, there's definitely some sort of sophistication there.
In a sense, yeah, that they could fight as a cohesive unit.
Yeah.
So, they had an imperial elite guard that numbered
Ooh.
10,000 alone.
Huh, that sounds familiar.
No, yeah.
Just like what the Persians were doing. Oh, interesting.
Interesting. Now, this is more or less how their army would work. They'd have a front line. This would be mostly slingers and archers, bringing stone arrows and slings with small rocks in them. They would skirmish. Next, your second line would be your shock troops of axemen and clubmen, followed by a third line of short spears, and then a fourth line of long spears.
Okay.
For armor, the occasional wooden helmet.
Wooden helmet.
Wooden helmet.
Yeesh.
Yeah. And for officers and people of higher rank, you'd have copper around the wood helmet. So not great protection. And
Any chest armament?
occasionally quilted with wooden panels on the back. So we're not, and sometimes no armor at all, and just ceremonial clothing of their nation. So we're not dealing with very good armor here, to say the least. Some of their weapons, though, these are interesting.
Okay.
And a lot of people think primitive culture, primitive weapons.
Definitely not. Are you kidding me? The more primitive the culture, the more sophisticated the weapons, if nothing else.
Well, these motherfuckers have had thousands of years to develop the most effective ways at killing each other with stone and wood. And I think these things are pretty badass, the weapons they bring to the field. As effective as steel or bronze weapons? No, not even close. But certainly cool and worth taking a look at.
Well, what they had available to them, yeah.
Yeah, so we've got the Estolica. This would be a small, flexible throwing spear that's going to be used by their skirmisher troops that come from the jungle.
Okay.
So a lot of their tribal troops that they're bringing to battle.
So this being more like a javelin than I think.
More like a short javelin, yeah.
Alright.
They also would have longer spears, which would be fielded by more of their regular troops in the fourth line.
Okay.
Most likely with a stone or obsidian head. Usually stone.
They had obsidian as well then.
In some cases, they did have some obsidian, yeah.
Wow.
So we've got slings. These would be able to sling small rounded stones. Not going to be very effective against the shield wall, quite frankly.
Okay.
More of a distraction than anything else in this case. A bola. Now, this is a long rope with picture three ropes jutting off of it with stones at the end. You'd swing it around and try and entangle your opponent's legs. This was used as a hunting tool, right?
Right, of course.
Now picture it's an incapacitation weapon.
Right.
You throw it at an opponent who's running, you throw it at their legs, it entangles their legs, trip and fall. So that's going to be one of their tools for skirmishing as well.
I'm not too sure, but it could be useful against cavalry. How is it fared against cavalry?
Man, against a concerted cavalry charge, I'm going to say it's not effective against an individual horse. If you're able to ambush and kind of sneak out of possibly a jungle setting or from behind rocks and, it could be effective then.
Right.
But against a head-on cavalry charge, I'm
Probably
gonna
not
say
going to do much.
No.
I suppose that's fair.
Their spear, which was favored by the Cusco, like I said, long stone and sometimes obsidian heads.
Alright.
Now, the Macana was the most common Incan weapon. This one's cool. It was a star-headed spear or club.
Whoa.
So, picture the star itself would have been made out of obsidian or stone, the club itself being made out of wood. Now, this is going to be used to break bones, bludgeon, break ribs. It's a bludgeoning weapon, which I think their bludgeoning weapons are going to be the most effective weapons they have. I don't think their sharp weapons are going to be able to pierce through the armor.
Definitely not.
So-
Well, it's entirely possible they might be able to nick the more unarmored areas, able to get some flesh, but definitely the bludgeoning weapon's definitely going to be their go-to.
Well, we'll see. Their bow and arrow, mostly used by their jungle troops. Stone arrowheads, once again, which against unarmored troops, phenomenal penetrating power. Stone arrows are effective. It just against steel and shields, we're going to see. Now, their clubs was very specific. Picture a bladed paddle, right? Double-sided, like a sword, right? Bladed, would sometimes have studs or spikes made out of palm wood, so very hard. Bludgeoning weapon, also sometimes used as a sharp weapon. And their axes, referred to as neck breakers, made out of stone or sometimes copper. Pretty much the only metal weapon they're fielding. Now, I'm going to have to emphasize again, stone weapons do not penetrate steel armor.
No, they do not.
They don't, or metal armor. So, tactics. Shock and awe. Before battles, they march ceremonially in parade in front of their opponents and try and intimidate them, try and scare them, try and get them out of battle. This could last days, this intimidation phase.
Whoa.
Try and scare them. You want to go back? You can still go back, surrender peacefully. Shock and awe. So, their first line is going to begin with screening fire and skirmishing. They're slingers, they're archers. This is what they're going to be good for in this battle. Laying down that screening fire so you can't see what's coming in next. Then the shock troops come in. Your axe troops, your club troops, they're going to charge, try and break the cohesion of the lines. Their army would be divided into three groups, right? The center group would engage the enemy front, the other and hold them down. The other two are going to try a flanking or encircling maneuver. So they could also capable of doing a feigned retreat. The center line would feign a retreat, fake.
Feign a retreat, yeah.
Yeah, feign a retreat.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, the feigning tactic is essentially It looks like a full-on retreat. However, it's more likely to lure an enemy into an ambush.
You're doing it cohesively. You're running away, but you're still keeping rank. So the enemy thinks, oh, look, these
they broke in formation. Let's go get them. Yeah.
So they chase after you recklessly.
Yeah.
You turn around and encircle them afterwards. You collapse in on them because they've chased you. They've broken cohesion. They're out of formation, and then you turn around and smash them. So they were capable. Yeah, honestly, I was impressed that they were capable of pincer movements and feigned
That
retreats.
is very interesting.
Yeah, that thoroughly impressed me. Especially, that's something they're going to have to be able to do to take advantage of their larger numbers against a smaller.
Now, yeah, depending on where the terrain might be, I could definitely see that being a deciding factor against William, because I have every confidence that he has definitely trained his men to be as stalwart and as disciplined and as efficient as possible. However, if they see they have the definite advantage over a technologically inferior foe, and they might want to press it, and they might fall into a trap like that.
They could be lured.
There's
into
no
charge.
reason why they wouldn't.
You never know.
Yeah.
They're going to have to advance close order.
Yeah.
And slowly and just butchery.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a second. So, capable of some guerrilla warfare depending on the terrain. That could be interesting, especially their jungle troops were capable of guerrilla warfare.
Oh, yeah.
Light infantry, obviously, not good in a drawn-out fight. They're going to need to get this over quickly.
Yeah.
Against horses, they use ditches and ground spikes, try and corral them and trap them. And environmental weapons, they were known to roll large stones downhill, set grass fires.
Holy.
So that's going to be interesting.
Very interesting.
Now, I'm just going to mention some notable victories and names.
Sure,
We don't know much about them because, unfortunately, one of the
Doesn't seem to be
fascinating
much
things.
in them, yeah.
One of the fascinating things about the Incas, the only empire ever to not have writing. They didn't have writing, so they didn't keep records. So we know about these battles only from name. So notable victories of Atahualpa would be Canary, Chimborazo, and Quiquipan. A lot of these are in the civil war against his brother. He lost a couple in those, a battle of Tumebamba and Chilopumba. They're a lot of fun to say, I'm not going to lie.
Chilapumba.
Chilopumba. Oye, mojito, cabrón.
Stop. I'm sorry. We're sorry.
We're not sorry.
Okay, he's not sorry. I'm
I'm
sorry.
unapologetically white. Now, let's see where they're facing off.
All right, let's see it.
Because terrain, I feel like in this battle, this is not necessarily clear cut.
Yeah.
Both have decided advantages.
So definitely the advantage for William would be basically anything that's very distinctly English. So we're talking Scottish Highlands, we're talking forests, even densely packed forests. He'd still be comfortable fighting there. Open fields, hilled plains.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah, and definitely for Atahualpa, his advantage would be, in exactly where he's comfortable with, in the jungles of Peru.
Hold on, I'm going to have to pick it accidentally. I want to do the click. Are you ready for this?
Yes, ready. Hello.
Okay.
Okay. Wow. Jeez.
The city of Constantinople.
Constantinople.
So it looks like who?
How is that going to work?
Wow.
So Atahualpa with his 100,000 men, all crammed in the city of Constantinople. Jeez, that's like a fish out of water.
That is completely a fish out of water.
They're not going to be able to know a thing about what to do. I mean, William the Conqueror definitely isn't used to city fighting either, because let's be honest, there wasn't really any cities that large.
No, London.
As Constantinople. Anywhere, not London, not Wessex, nowhere.
No.
Nowhere the size of Constantinople. So,
But here's what I'm going to say. If there was a terrain that William could use to kind of corral a much larger opponent, take advantage of his shield wall, his superior discipline, and his armor, it would be a city.
it would be, yeah. There's nowhere to run. I mean, we've definitely made this parameter knowing that they're essentially boxed in, so Atahualpa has no chance of escape. Now, with that being said, I'm not even too sure he would know how to escape.
No.
The city walls of that size and of that intricacy. I mean, let's not count him out altogether entirely. I'm fairly confident that Atahualpa would send his scouts to every possible corner of that city and somehow map out some sort of strategy that he could use.
Fair enough.
Because he does have the advantage of numbers, after all. He could send 10,000 men in every possible direction. They could map out the city well enough.
That's true. That's true. He has the scouting advantage.
Yeah.
Now, what does he do when he finds those 10,000 troops blocking off? Man, let's say that this is taking place at the Milvian Bridge of Constantinople.
Sure, yeah.
What is Atahualpa going to do when, William the Conqueror engages in a shield wall formation in front of the Milvian Bridge and hunkers down?
I suppose the first thing they do is to try this intimidation factor that they're fond of. Well, because they see armed men ready for combat, or as far as they understand it, they're ready for combat. I'd imagine Atahualpa would see that challenge of aggression with his own.
So he's going to parade, they're going to do their chants, hurl their insults, do their ceremonial marching, and their religious rituals before the battle. And William is going to wait in this defensive formation.
Very much so. He's going to wait, watch, and perhaps even throw out a prayer or two.
Yeah. Now, man, I do not like Atahualpa's odds in this.
No. The city of Constantinople is definitely not a place where he wants to fight. Any contained city like that, it's possibly his worst possible place.
And if you guys are thinking, look at the sheer numbers, 6,000 Romans were able to kill like 200,000 troops in the Iceni Rebellion. Mm-hmm. And those were troops that were familiar with Romans. Those were English rebels, who are going to be very well familiar with Romans. This is different. Atahualpa and his troops have never encountered anything like this.
Definitely not.
They've never encountered this kind of technology. They've never encountered steel. Right?
No.
They've never encountered this kind of cohesiveness in a military unit, ever.
No, this is going to be too much for them.
So, I'm going to say William hunkers down on the Milvian Bridge and
takes on wave after wave of Incan assault.
They're going to skirmish.
Oh, very much so.
They're going to go for that front line assault, right? They're going to skirmish. The stones are going to bounce off the shield.
Oh, yeah.
Their stone arrows are going to have no effect. They're going to splinter. Their shock troops are going to come in. And they're just going to fall upon the English shields, and they're going to get hacked and stabbed to death.
Oh, yes.
I feel like their skirmishers are going to be chased off by cavalry, and I feel like the English longbows are just going to impale these men.
Oh, I forgot to mention that the English also had crossbows. So, not like it matters, because there's no penetration happening here, it's just flesh.
So to bring back another anecdote of two more closely matched opponents, Richard Lionheart versus Saladin in the Battle of Arsuf. Saladin's bows, which were composite and recurve, had little effect apparently on the heavily armored, heavily shielded troops there. Whereas the crossbows of Richard Lionheart would take out the skirmishers as they came forward to assault their lines. I see this going similarly.
It is.
And if this is on the Milvian Bridge, I see William being at least a little more familiar with the city, being able to resupply himself just a little bit better with arrows.
Yeah. And unfortunately, they're inside a city. Despite the fact that Constantinople is a big city, it's still a city. There's still going to be tight corridors, and Atahualpa's 100,000 soldiers, those numbers aren't going to matter in those tight formations.
Especially lightly armored troops.
Definitely not lightly armored troops. This is the worst possible place Atahualpa can possibly fight in. And no, Atahualpa's chances were pretty minimal, but I was hoping that maybe they could find them a way into an open plain.
Maybe a place
fighting.
where he could take advantage of his numbers, yeah.
And if that case, then William's 10,000 soldiers will be simply overwhelmed as they just get encompassed by the relentless assault of the Incas. But here,
that would have been his path to victory, right? But the way I see it now, I just see wave upon wave of skirmishers being mowed down by horse and by English longbows.
Like water crashing on a rock.
Yeah, and when the shock troops come in, your axe troops, your Makana troops, your club troops, they're just going to be slaughtered as well. Yeah. They're not going to stand up to the steel and the shields. And I see them routing and being chased down by cavalry and picked off.
And that's so unfortunate. I really, really was hoping Atahualpa had a better chance, but this is part of what we're doing here. This championship has to be done with a randomly generated field of battle.
It's important.
Because that is important. We want this to be as unique as possible when it comes to military engagement. Because just like in the field of battle, sometimes you have no idea when that engagement's going to happen or where it's going to happen.
Terrain and climate as well, William's favor. He's going to be more familiar with, that climate of Constantinople.
Definitely, yeah. I'd imagine that at one point in his life he's made a pilgrimage there, so... there's that as well.
Fuck, I'm ready to call this one. I mean, I don't think it
Yeah.
needs too much more discussion.
No, I don't suppose it does. Unfortunate. Really it is.
Unfortunate, but I mean...
Honestly, Atahualpa's had the odds stacked against him against William since the beginning.
Well...
The technological inferiority is simply undeniable.
Apologies, Addy. I'm calling you for short. But you lose.
William the Conqueror advances, Atahualpa.
You will meet Saladin in the loser's bracket.
Oh, buddy.
The first matchup of round 2 will be William the Conqueror versus Khosrow the First. In the loser's round, Saladin will meet Atahualpa. Wow,
That's pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Saladin al-Ayyubi versus Atahualpa. That's gonna be interesting, especially considering where they might fight.
Dude, it's been surprising. So far in these first 2 matchups, the terrain has been make or break.
Very much so.
Like, it hasn't even been... I wouldn't even call it influential. It's been everything.
Very much so. It's very much decided who would win and who would lose in this entire bracket. And I imagine that's going to be consistently the case in the future matchups. Hopefully not, though.
Hopefully not. Hopefully in the future matchups we can get some more even ground, for lack of a better term. It's interesting because I really thought the Amazon rainforest would be a wild card, but it just so heavily favored one competitor over the other.
It did.
William and Khosrow. Fuck, that's going to be good.
That's going to be really good. The shield wall formation versus the Savaran cavalry? Jesus, that even sounds cool saying it out loud.
Damn. Okay. So, I suppose those are our 2 matchups for the day.
That is. We're done for today, ladies and gentlemen.
And now for the quote of the day.
Now, this comes from a very influential man by the name of Alfred Nobel. He, for those of you who do not know, invented dynamite.
And he did not like bells.
Yeah, Nobel.
Please, no bell! No bells!
And the quote of the day is, "The day when 2 army corps can annihilate each other in 1 second, all civilized nations, it is to be hoped, will recoil from war and discharge their troops."
How admirable. How incorrect.
Yeah, how incorrect indeed. Anyway, on that happy note, thank you so much for joining us here at the 3 Empires in the Tournament of Champions. See you guys next time. We will be having Joan of Arc face off against the mighty Alexander the Great, and Qin Shi Huang versus Scipio Africanus.
And after that, we will get into our loser's bracket and round 2 of our Tournament of Champions. For now, peace in the Middle East.
Bye. Alright. And we are dead.
That's it! I warned you once! Get out of me, tavern! Get out! Get out!
Jesteśmy my, the side, so I'm without help. My ear, fingers now, I know.